When my sister and I left the orphanage, all we received was Grandpa's farm, but the barn floor had been replaced once. What we found there would change not just our future, but the entire story of our past. If you've ever felt like you were starting over with nothing but a key and a question, then maybe this story is for you. Consider sticking around for it, and we can figure it out together. The day I turned 18 felt less like a celebration and more like a closing notice. For 16 years, the St. Jude's Home for Children had been the only world I knew, the only world my sister Leah had ever known. It was a world of beige walls, echoing hallways, and the perpetual scent of industrial cleaner fighting a losing battle against boiled cabbage. Freedom, when it finally came, didn't feel like a soaring bird. It felt like being pushed off a low, crumbling ledge. Leah stood beside me, clutching her worn backpack, her knuckles white. She was 16, and because I was now legally an adult, her fate was tethered to mine. We were a package deal, a 2-for-1 eviction from the only home we could remember. Ms. Albright, our case manager for the final 2 years, stood before us in the sterile administrative office, her face a practiced mask of gentle authority. She had kind eyes, but they were tired, weighed down by a decade of seeing kids like us churn through the system. On her desk sat a single thick manila envelope, looking ancient and important. "Alex," she began, her voice soft but firm, the same tone she used for delivering bad news and weekly chore assignments. "As you know, today is your 18th birthday. Legally, you are no longer a ward of the state." She slid the envelope across the polished wood of her desk. It stopped just short of my trembling fingers. "This is your inheritance." The word hung in the air, absurd and out of place. Inheritance. It was a word for people in books, for families with sprawling trees and hidden fortunes. For us, it felt like a joke. Our parents were a faded photograph and a box of ashes we weren't allowed to keep. Our grandfather, who had taken us in for 2 chaotic, grief-stricken years after they died, had surrendered us to the state before his own heart gave out. We'd been told he had nothing, a failed farmer with a broken spirit. Leah shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the sound of her worn sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ms. Albright offered a small, sad smile. "It's the deed to your grandfather's property. A farm just outside of a town called Northwood. It's not much, I'm afraid. The state has been paying the property taxes out of a small trust he left, but that money is gone now. The property is yours, free and clear, but also as is." "As is," I repeated, the phrase tasting like rust. I knew what it meant. It meant broken, neglected, forgotten. A burden disguised as a gift. I finally reached out and pulled the envelope toward me. The paper was brittle, the flap secured by a string wrapped around a small cardboard circle. Inside, there was a stack of papers filled with dense, legal language I couldn't begin to decipher. A deed, a property tax statement from the previous year marked "paid," and a 2-page summary from a county clerk. I scanned the summary, my eyes catching on phrases like "structural integrity not guaranteed" and "property sold without warranty." At the bottom of the second page, a handwritten note was stapled to the document. It was from the county assessor who had last visited the property 5 years ago. It was a simple, almost careless addendum. Main farmhouse in significant disrepair. Outhouses collapsed. Main barn appears stable, though a section of the floor, roughly 10 by 15 feet on the west side, has been replaced with new concrete. Unusual for a property this neglected. The detail was so specific, so odd, that it snagged in my mind. A new floor. In a place where everything else was falling down, someone had taken the time to pour fresh concrete in the barn. Why? "Is that it?" Leah asked, her hope deflating like a punctured balloon. "A broken house?" Ms. Albright nodded slowly. "I know it's not what you were hoping for, kids. There's a bus ticket for each of you to Northwood and $300 in cash. It's what was left. It's meant to help you get on your feet." $300, a broken farm, and a sister to take care of. It wasn't a start. It was a dead end. I folded the papers and stuffed them back into the envelope, my hands feeling clumsy and useless. The weight of it was immense, not the physical weight of the paper, but the crushing burden of what it represented. A future I was completely unprepared for. We said our goodbyes, which were few and awkward. We had friends, of course, but in a place like St. Jude's, friendships were temporary, forged in shared survival and easily broken by the churn of the system. We were just the next ones out the door. Walking down the long driveway of the orphanage for the last time felt surreal. The manicured lawns and imposing brick building behind us had been our prison and our sanctuary. Now it was just a building. The world outside its gates seemed impossibly vast and loud. We walked to the bus station in near silence, the city noise a roaring in my ears. The $300 was tucked into my pocket, a fragile shield against the unknown. Leah held my hand, her grip tight and desperate. She was trying to be brave, but I could feel the fear trembling through her. I was scared too, terrified. I was an adult for all of 3 hours, and I was already failing. We found our bus, a grimy vessel that smelled of stale cigarettes and disinfectant. We took a seat near the back, the torn vinyl cool against my skin. As the bus rumbled to life and pulled away from the curb, I looked out the window at the city we were leaving behind. It wasn't our home, but at least we knew its rules. Now we were heading toward a place with no rules, no guarantees, and a barn with a strange new floor. The bus ride was a 4-hour journey from the dense, vertical world of the city to the flat, sprawling emptiness of the countryside. Skyscrapers gave way to strip malls, then to suburbs, then to lonely stretches of highway flanked by endless fields. The world outside the window turned from gray to green and brown. Leah fell asleep against my shoulder, her breathing soft and even. For a few moments, she looked like a little kid again, free from the weight of our new reality. I stayed awake, the legal documents resting in my lap. I kept pulling out the assessor's note, reading that one line over and over. A section of the floor has been replaced with new concrete. It was a splinter in my mind. In a life of unanswered questions, why our parents died, why Grandpa gave us up, why we were left with so little, this was a new one, small and concrete, literally. It felt different. It felt solvable. The bus finally hissed to a stop in Northwood. The town was little more than a wide spot in the road, a single main street with a handful of storefronts, a gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a post office. The air smelled of damp earth and something vaguely sweet, like hay. It was quiet, the kind of profound quiet that feels heavy after a lifetime of institutional noise. A single taxi was idling by the bus stop. The driver, a grizzled man who looked like he'd been sitting there since the town was founded. He eyed our backpacks and our city-worn clothes with weary curiosity. "You kids lost?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "We're looking for the old Miller farm," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The driver's eyebrows shot up. Old Man Miller's place? Haven't heard anyone ask for that in years. It's a good 5 miles out of town. You sure that's where you're headed? I nodded, showing him the deed as if it were a passport. He grunted, a sound that could have meant anything, and popped the trunk. All right, hop in. But the road gets rough the last mile. I'll take you as far as I can. The drive was a journey back in time. We passed modest houses with neat lawns. Then the houses grew farther apart, separated by fields of corn and soy. The paved road turned to gravel, and the taxi rattled and groaned, kicking up a cloud of dust behind us. Finally, the driver slowed and pointed to a barely there dirt path nearly swallowed by overgrown weeds. This is it, he said. End of the line for me. The house is another quarter mile down that track. Good luck, kids. You're gonna need it. He didn't wait for a reply. He took my money, turned the car around in a clumsy multi-point turn, and disappeared back the way we came, leaving us in a plume of settling dust. We were alone, utterly and completely alone. The silence rushed back in, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of wind through the tall grass. For a long moment we just stood there at the mouth of the dirt path, 2 orphans on the doorstep of a ghost. Then I shouldered my pack, took Leah's hand, and we started walking toward our inheritance. The path was worse than the taxi driver had led on. Weeds clawed at our legs, and hidden ruts threatened to twist our ankles. After what felt like an eternity, the path opened into a clearing, and we saw it, the farmhouse. Significant disrepair was a gentle way of putting it. The house was a skeleton. The porch roof sagged in the middle like a broken back. Windows were boarded up or shattered, and the white paint had peeled away to reveal the dark, weathered wood beneath. It looked haunted, not by ghosts, but by simple, profound neglect. To the right of the house stood the barn. It was huge, far bigger than the house, its red paint faded to a dull, rusty brown. But unlike the house, it seemed solid. Its roofline was straight, its walls unbowed. It stood like a silent, patient guardian over the decay. "This is it?" Leah's voice was small, fragile. "This is home?" I didn't have an answer for her. I couldn't bring myself to call this place home. It was just a place, a problem we had to solve. I found the keys in the envelope, a small ring of 2 old, rusted skeleton keys. One, I guessed, was for the house. The other, larger and heavier, was probably for the barn. We approached the house first, cautiously climbing the groaning steps of the porch. The front door was swollen in its frame, but after a few hard shoves, it scraped open with a sound like a tortured scream. The inside was a time capsule of abandonment. Dust lay thick on everything, coating the forgotten furniture in a layer of gray velvet. A fine powder of plaster dust covered the floor from the crumbling ceiling. The air was thick and musty, the smell of trapped memories and slow decay. In the living room, a sofa and armchair sat draped in white sheets, looking like lumpy ghosts. In the kitchen, a tin of coffee still sat on the counter next to a cup, as if someone had just stepped out for a moment, years ago. It was profoundly sad. We explored the small house in a kind of hushed reverence. 2 small bedrooms upstairs, a bathroom with fixtures stained brown from rusty water. My grandfather's room still had clothes in the closet, simple flannel shirts and denim overalls, all smelling of cedar and dust. It was too much. The sheer weight of the abandonment was suffocating. I felt a wave of anger at my grandfather. How could he let it get like this? How could he just walk away and leave it all to rot? "I don't want to stay here, Alex," Leah said, her eyes welling up with tears. "It's creepy." "We'll just look at the barn," I said, needing to change the subject, needing to focus on the one thing that didn't feel completely hopeless. "Then we'll figure it out." The barn door was massive, a sliding wooden monolith that took both our strengths to budge. It rolled open on a rusty track, screeching in protest, letting a wide shaft of afternoon sunlight cut through the gloom inside. The interior was cavernous, the ceiling soaring up into a web of rafters where pigeons cooed and fluttered. The air smelled of old hay, dust, and dry earth. Light streamed in through cracks in the walls, illuminating swirling motes of dust like tiny galaxies. Stalls for animals lined one wall, empty and silent. A hayloft, mostly empty, loomed above. And there, on the west side, was the floor, just as the note had described. Most of the barn floor was packed earth, hard as stone from decades of use. But a large rectangular section was different. It was a perfect slab of smooth, pale gray concrete, starkly new against the dark, aged surroundings. It was about the size of a small room. It looked utterly, jarringly out of place. There was no logical reason for it to be there. No farming equipment that would require a foundation like that. No sign of a repair to a drain or a water line. It was just there. A clean, modern scar on an old, forgotten place. We walked over to it, our footsteps echoing in the vast space. I knelt down and ran my hand over the surface. It was smooth, professionally done. Not a patch job. Someone had poured this with intent. "What is it?" Leah asked, her fear of the house momentarily forgotten, replaced by curiosity. "I don't know," I said, my mind racing. "But it's the only new thing here. The only thing someone cared about." We spent the rest of the afternoon doing a more thorough search of the house, not for a place to sleep, but for answers. In the kitchen, tucked away in a drawer full of old receipts and dried-up pens, I found a small, leather-bound journal. It was Grandpa's. His name, Samuel Miller, was embossed in faded gold on the cover. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. This had to be it. I sat down at the dusty kitchen table, Leah peering over my shoulder, and opened it. The first several pages were what you'd expect. Notes on weather, crop prices, reminders to fix a fence or oil a tractor. The entries were dated, and I quickly flipped toward the end, looking for the time just before he gave us up. The entries grew shorter, more frantic. The notes about farming stopped. They were replaced by names I didn't recognize, and notes about meetings. Met with R. He wants the access road. Told him no. A week later. Someone cut the fence line again. Cows got out. Took all day to round them up. Then a chilling entry from just a month before we were sent to St. Jude's. They came to the house last night, not asking anymore. Leah saw them from her window. She's terrified. Can't keep them safe here. There's no other way. My hands were shaking. This wasn't a story of a man who gave up. This was a story of a man who was being threatened. Leah read the words, and her breath hitched. "Who were they, Alex?" "I don't know," I whispered, turning the page. The last entry was written in a shaky, almost illegible scrawl. It wasn't dated. "The floor is done. It's the only way to protect it. To protect them. God forgive me for what I have to do next." The floor. He was talking about the barn floor. It wasn't just a repair. It was a hiding place. A vault. a final desperate act of a man trying to protect something. Suddenly, the farm didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a map. The anger I'd felt toward my grandfather dissolved, replaced by a deep, aching sadness and a burning need to understand. He hadn't abandoned us. He had sent us away to save us. We had to know what was under that concrete. But how? We had no tools, no strength to break through a solid slab of concrete. We went back to the barn as the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. We examined the slab from every angle. It was seamless, perfectly level. There was no obvious way in, no hidden latch or hollow spot. Leah, smaller and closer to the ground, was running her hands along the edge where the concrete met the dirt. "Alex," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "Look." I knelt beside her. Along the edge, almost completely hidden by dirt and stray bits of hay, was a thin, dark line. It wasn't a crack. It was a metal seam. We frantically scraped away the dirt with our fingers. It was the edge of a steel plate set flush with the concrete surface. And at one corner, almost invisible, was a small, recessed hole, just big enough for a key. A key. We looked at each other, the same thought dawning on us at the same time. We ran back to the house, back to the ring of keys I'd left on the kitchen counter. There were two of them. One had opened the front door. The other one, the larger, heavier one, we hadn't used. It was an old, solid piece of iron, different from the house key. I snatched it from the ring, and we sprinted back to the barn, our hearts pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. The sun had almost completely set, and the inside of the barn was growing dark. I knelt down, my hands trembling, and fit the key into the lock. It slid in perfectly. With a deep breath, I turned it. There was a loud, satisfying clank of metal on metal, a sound that echoed through the silent barn like a gunshot. A section of the concrete, about 3 feet square, had unlocked. It was a hatch. I put my fingers into the recessed handle that had been revealed and pulled. It was incredibly heavy, but with Leah helping me, we managed to lift the steel and concrete lid and swing it open on a hidden hinge. It revealed a dark, square hole. A ladder made of iron rebar led down into the blackness. The air that rose from the opening was cool and dry, smelling of earth and metal. We hadn't thought to bring a light, and the barn was now almost completely dark. We couldn't go down there, not yet. We closed the heavy lid, the sound of it locking back into place feeling final and momentous. We had found the door. Tomorrow, we would find out what was behind it. That night, we didn't even try to sleep in the house. The dust, the memories, the sheer oppressive sadness of the place was too much. We took the sheets off the ghostly furniture and brought them out to the porch. We had a small bag of groceries we'd bought in town, bread, peanut butter, a couple of apples. We ate our meager dinner in silence, sitting on the top step of the sagging porch, watching the stars appear in the vast, dark sky. There were more stars than I had ever seen in my life, a brilliant, glittering canopy, untouched by the city's glow. For the first time all day, I felt a flicker of something other than fear or anxiety. It was a strange sense of peace. The world was quiet here. We were alone, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a sanctuary. I thought about my grandfather's journal. Can't keep them safe here. He had hidden something, then sent us away, then let the world believe he was a broken old man who had abandoned his family. He had sacrificed his reputation, his home, everything, to protect us. The weight of that sacrifice settled on me, a heavy but clarifying pressure. Our inheritance wasn't the decaying farm. It was the secret hidden beneath it. And it was our job to uncover it, to understand it. I looked over at Leah, who had her head tilted back, gazing up at the Milky Way. She looked small against the vastness of the night, but she wasn't crying anymore. Her eyes were wide with wonder. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. I couldn't bring myself to agree yet, but I understood what she meant. The city had been a cage of concrete and noise. This place, for all its decay, had a wild, breathing life to it. It was real. I just sat there for a long time after Leah fell asleep, wrapped in her sheet next to me. I was holding this new story of my grandfather, this new shape of my past. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where a truth you've held on to for your entire life just shatters, and you have to piece together a whole new reality from the fragments. It's a terrifying, disorienting feeling, but it can also be a beginning. If you've been through something similar, if you've had to rewrite your own history, I'd be honored if you shared a piece of that in the comments. Reading your stories, knowing that other people have navigated this kind of emotional earthquake, it helps. It truly does. It reminds me, and maybe it will remind someone else, that we're not alone in these deep, confusing woods. Knowing that makes the journey forward feel just a little less daunting. We woke with the sun, stiff and sore from sleeping on the hard porch boards. The morning air was crisp and cool. The first order of business was light. I remembered seeing a couple of old oil lanterns in the house, and after a bit of searching, we found a can of kerosene in a kitchen cupboard that, miraculously, wasn't empty. I cleaned the dusty glass of one lantern, filled it, and trimmed the wick. The flame caught with a soft whoosh, casting a warm, flickering glow. It felt like a tiny victory, a small spark of order in the chaos. With the lantern in hand and a crowbar we'd found in a rusty toolbox, we went back to the barn. The morning light filtered through the cracks in the walls, but the hole in the floor was still a pit of absolute darkness. I unlocked the hatch again, and this time we were ready. "I'll go first," I said, my voice trying for a confidence I didn't feel. Leah nodded, her eyes wide. She held the heavy hatch open as I lowered the lantern into the hole. The light illuminated a small, concrete-lined chamber about 10 feet deep. The iron ladder was sturdy. I took a deep breath and began to climb down. The air grew cooler and smelled of damp concrete and something else, something like old paper. My feet touched the solid floor of the chamber. I held the lantern up. The room was small, no bigger than a closet, and in the center of it sat a large metal footlocker, the kind soldiers use. It was army green, with heavy latches on the front. It wasn't locked. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I waved for Leah to come down, and she scrambled down the ladder, her face a mixture of fear and awe. "What is it?" she breathed, staring at the chest. I think this is it," I said. "This is what he was protecting." Together, we knelt in front of the footlocker. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the latches. They snapped open with a loud, metallic sound that made us both jump. I took another deep breath, looked at Leah, and then I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was money. Stacks and stacks of it, neatly bundled in paper bands. It wasn't a pirate's treasure of gold coins, but it was more cash than I had ever seen in my life. I picked up one of the bundles. They were $100 bills. There had to be tens of thousands, maybe more, packed into the chest. Leah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. For a moment, we were just stunned into silence by the sheer visual impact of it all. It was an impossible, life-altering amount of money. But underneath the money, there was something else. A large, sealed envelope made of thick, waterproof material. And on top of it, a smaller, regular envelope with my name, Alex, written on it in my grandfather's familiar spidery handwriting. My hands trembled as I picked it up. This was a message from the past, from a man I had spent my life resenting. I carefully tore it open. Inside was a single, folded sheet of paper. The letter was dated just 2 days before he signed the papers to put us in state care. I began to read aloud, my voice cracking with emotion. My dearest Alex, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found your way back home. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive an old man for the choice he had to make. I know you must have grown up hating me for sending you away. I have lived with that knowledge every day, and it has been my penance. But I need you to understand. I didn't abandon you. I saved you. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had to pause, to steady my breathing. Leah put a comforting hand on my arm. I continued reading. The men I told you about in my journal, they're part of a local crew, run by a man named Richter. They've been buying up land around here for cheap, using threats and intimidation. They're fronting for a big development corporation that wants to build a resort. They wanted my land because it has the only clean water access for miles. I wouldn't sell. Your grandmother and I built this farm from nothing. It was meant to be for your parents, and then for you. I couldn't let them take it. He went on to explain what had happened. The threats had escalated. They burned a shed. They poisoned his well. He knew they wouldn't hesitate to hurt us to get to him. So he devised a plan. He had a secret he'd kept for years. His brother, my great-uncle, had been a wild one who got into trouble and had to disappear. Before he left, he'd given Grandpa his life savings, a significant amount of cash from some shady dealings, and told him to use it only in a true emergency, to protect the family. This was that emergency. I used some of the money to build this room and pour the new floor, the letter continued. A perfect hiding place. The rest of it is in this chest. It's for you and Leah. It's clean now, laundered by time and silence. It's your start, your chance at a life I couldn't give you. But there's something else in here too, something more important than the money. I looked back into the chest at the large, waterproof envelope. Richter and his crew are not just bullies, they're criminals. For months I gathered proof. I recorded conversations. I made copies of their fraudulent contracts with other farmers they've cheated. It's all in the big envelope. It's evidence, enough to put them all away for a very long time. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was a weapon. Here is the choice I am leaving you, Alex. It's a terrible burden to place on your young shoulders, but I trust you. You have your grandmother's strength. You can take the money and disappear. Start a new life somewhere far away from here. No one would blame you. Or you can stay. You can use this evidence to fight back, to get justice for the people of this valley, to reclaim this farm and make it your home. But if you choose to fight, know that they will fight back. They are dangerous men. The letter ended with a final, heartbreaking plea. Whatever you choose, live a good life. Be happy. Look after your sister. That is all I have ever wanted for you. All my love, Grandpa. I finished reading, and the small chamber was silent, save for the sound of our breathing and the soft hiss of the lantern. I folded the letter and held it to my chest. 16 years of bitterness and anger had been wiped away by a few hundred words. He wasn't a coward. He was a hero. He had played a long, lonely game to protect us, sacrificing everything in the process. I cried then, deep, racking sobs for the grandfather I had never truly known, for the years we had lost, for the terrible choice he had left me. Leah cried with me, holding on to me in the dark, underground room. We weren't orphans who had been abandoned. We were the inheritors of a legacy, a fight. The money was a tool, the evidence was a responsibility, and the farm, this broken-down, neglected piece of land, was the battlefield. We sat there for a long time, in the quiet dark, surrounded by our grandfather's last will and testament. The choice he laid out was stark: run or fight, safety or justice. I looked at the stacks of money. It was a ticket to anywhere. We could go to a city, get an apartment, finish school, be normal. We could leave Northwood and its ghosts behind forever. It was the easy path, the sensible one. But then I looked at the large envelope containing the evidence. I thought of my grandfather, alone in his decaying house, documenting the crimes of these men, pouring a concrete floor to hide his last desperate hope for his family's future. I thought of the other farmers he mentioned, people who had been cheated and intimidated. If we ran, Richter and his crew would win. They would get this land, and they would continue to prey on others. My grandfather's sacrifice would have been for nothing. "What are we going to do?" Leah asked, her voice hushed. Her eyes were fixed on my face, trusting me to make the right call. And in that moment, I felt the weight of adulthood settle on me, not as a burden, but as a mantle of responsibility. I was no longer a ward of the state. I was the guardian of my sister and the keeper of my grandfather's legacy. The choice felt impossible, but at the same time, there was only one real answer. Running would feel like a betrayal. It would be another form of abandonment. "We're going to stay," I said, the words feeling more certain as I spoke them. "We're going to fight." Leah didn't hesitate. She squeezed my hand and nodded, a fierce determination in her young eyes. "Okay," she said, "we'll do it together." We made a plan. We would take a small amount of the cash, enough to live on and make some basic repairs to the house. The rest and the evidence would stay hidden here in its concrete vault. We couldn't go to the local police. Grandpa's journal had mentioned that Richter had the sheriff in his pocket. We needed help from the outside. The first thing we did was make the house habitable. We spent a week scrubbing, sweeping, and patching. We used some of the money to buy supplies in the next town over, where no one would know us. We bought new mattresses, groceries, a small generator for electricity, and tools. We fixed the leaky kitchen sink, patched the hole in the living room ceiling, and replaced the broken window panes. Slowly, painstakingly, the house began to feel less like a ruin and more like a home. It was hard work, but it was good work. With every nail I hammered and every floorboard I scrubbed, I felt like I was reclaiming not just the house, but a piece of myself. Leah was incredible. She planted a small garden in the overgrown patch behind the house, her small hands tending to the soil with a gentle care I hadn't known she possessed. She found a box of old books and spent the evenings reading to me by lantern light on the porch. We were building a life, a real one, on the foundation of our grandfather's love. After 2 weeks of settling in, I knew it was time to take the next step. I needed legal advice. I remembered Ms. Albright, her tired but kind eyes. She was part of the system, but I had always sensed that she genuinely cared. She was the only person I could think of to trust. I took the bus back to the city, a journey that felt worlds away from the one I had taken just a few weeks prior. I was no longer a scared kid being pushed out into the world. I was a man with a purpose. I met Ms. Albright in a small coffee shop near her office. I told her everything. I showed her a copy of my grandfather's letter and described the evidence we had found. I watched her face as she listened, saw her professional mask of calm neutrality slowly give way to shock, and then to a grim resolve. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, stirring her coffee. "Alex," she said finally, her voice low and serious, "you are in a very dangerous situation. These are not people to be taken lightly." "I know," I said, "but I can't just walk away." "My grandfather didn't." She looked at me, a flicker of pride in her tired eyes. "No," she said, "he didn't." She told me she knew a lawyer, a man who specialized in pro bono cases against corporate corruption. His name was Ben Carter, and he was, in her words, a bulldog who hated bullies. She made a call, and an hour later, I was sitting in a small, cluttered office, telling my story all over again to a man with a sharp suit and an even sharper gaze. Ben Carter listened without interruption, his fingers steepled under his chin. When I was done, he asked to see the evidence. The next day, I brought him the entire waterproof envelope. He spent hours going through it, his expression growing more and more intent. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long, low whistle. "Your grandfather was one hell of an investigator," he said. "This is comprehensive. Taped confessions, forged documents, a clear money trail connecting Richter's crew to the Development Corporation. This is a slam dunk, a RICO case waiting to happen." "So you'll help us?" I asked, a wave of relief washing over me. "Help you?" Ben grinned, a rare and fearsome sight. "Alex, I'm going to tear them apart. But we have to be smart. We can't just walk into the local DA's office. We'll take this to the state attorney general. We'll go federal if we have to. But it will take time, and you and your sister will need to be careful. Very careful." The legal battle was a slow, grinding process. Months passed. Ben and his team worked tirelessly, building the case. Meanwhile, Leah and I continued to build our life at the farm. We learned to live with a quiet, underlying tension. Every unfamiliar car on the gravel road made our hearts leap. Every late-night noise was a potential threat. We received official-looking letters from the Development Corporation, offering to buy our land for a ridiculously low price. Then for a slightly more generous one, they were testing us, trying to see if we would fold. We ignored them, and the letters became more threatening, hinting at legal action for unpaid debts we didn't have. They were trying to manufacture leverage, but we held firm. We had a secret weapon they knew nothing about. The community in Northwood began to thaw toward us. The gruff taxi driver started waving when he drove by. The woman at the general store started asking after Leah's garden. An old farmer down the road, a man named Henderson, whose family had been neighbors with ours for generations, stopped by one afternoon. He'd heard we were fixing up the old Miller place. He didn't say much, just looked around with sad eyes, and told me my grandfather had been a good man, stubborn as a mule, but a good man. He told me how Richter's people had pressured him to sell a parcel of his land, threatening to block his access to the creek. He'd held out, but others hadn't been so lucky. His story, and others like it that we began to hear, hardened our resolve. We weren't just fighting for ourselves, we were fighting for the whole valley. The day the news broke, it was sudden and explosive. State and federal agents descended on Northwood. Richter and his entire crew were arrested in a series of coordinated raids. The local sheriff was taken into custody. The Development Corporation's regional office was raided, its records seized. It was the biggest scandal in the county's history. Our names were never mentioned. Ben had made sure of it. The case was built on my grandfather's evidence, but it was presented as the result of a long-term state investigation. We were protected, anonymous. We were safe. That evening, Leah and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. The air felt different, lighter. The heavy weight of the secret we'd been carrying was finally gone. "He did it, Alex," Leah said quietly, her head resting on my shoulder. "Grandpa did it." "We did it," I corrected her gently. "We finished what he started." The aftermath was transformative, not just for us, but for the town. The development deal collapsed. The farmers who had been cheated out of their land formed a coalition with Ben Carter's help and filed a class-action lawsuit. They were going to get their property back. The farm was truly ours now, free from threats and shadows. The money my grandfather had left us was still mostly untouched. It was our security, our future. It was enough for Leah to go to college, for me to take agricultural classes at the community college, to buy the equipment we needed to bring the farm back to life. It was a second chance, bought and paid for by a love we had never understood until now. I thought about inheritance. I used to think it was about money, about property, but I was wrong. Our real inheritance wasn't the cash in the footlocker or the deed to the land. It was the choice my grandfather gave us. It was the legacy of courage, of standing up to bullies, of protecting what you love. It was the lesson that home isn't just a place you are given. It's a place you fight for, a place you build. That farm became our home, not because of a legal document, but because of the work we put into it, the tears we shed for it, and the future we chose to build there. It taught us that the deepest roots are the ones you have to dig for yourself. If this story meant something to you, if you believe in the power of second chances and the fight to build a place to belong, please consider subscribing to the channel. This is a community for people who understand that life's most valuable inheritances are often invisible. And I want to ask you something down in the comments, and I truly hope you'll answer because I read every single one. What does home mean to you? Is it a place, a person, a memory, or a choice? Your stories matter. They are part of a larger story we are all building together. Thank you for listening.